The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air long before sunrise at Molly's Diner, a cozy little place on the edge of Brookhaven, a small town where everyone knew everyone. Except her. Her name was Leela Parker, a quiet 24-year-old waitress who worked the morning shift. She never liked drawing attention to herself. Her brown hair was always tied neatly in a low ponytail, her uniform always clean but slightly faded from years of washing. Customers often said she had kind eyes. But few ever really looked close enough to notice how tired they were. Every morning, Leela arrived before dawn, unlocking the diner with her trembling hands, whispering to herself, "You got this, Leela." It wasn't just the weight of her old car's loan or the bills piling up on her tiny kitchen table. It was life itself, pressing quietly against her chest. Yet, despite her shyness, she had a certain grace about her, the kind that came from empathy, not confidence. When the regulars came in, truckers, teachers, nurses finishing their night shifts, she remembered their names, their favorite coffee orders, and the little things that made their mornings easier. But she never said much more than she needed to. Leela had grown up with a mother who lost her hearing after an illness when Leela was 10. It changed everything. Kids teased her for learning sign language, and by the time she was in high school, she'd stopped talking about her family altogether. After her mother passed away, Leela never used sign again, at least not publicly, until the morning she walked in. It was a rainy Thursday. The diner was unusually quiet, only a few tables occupied. The door opened and a graceful elderly woman stepped inside, dressed in a soft cream coat, her silver hair neatly tied, a string of pearls around her neck. Everyone in the diner turned to look. Not because she was rich looking, but because she carried herself with elegance, like someone out of place in a small-town diner. Leela hurried to greet her, nervous but polite. "Good morning, ma'am. Table for one." The woman smiled faintly but didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes scanning Leela's lips. There was something soft in her gaze, kind but searching. When Leela repeated her question, the woman pointed to her ear and shook her head gently. She couldn't hear. Leela froze for a moment. It had been years since she'd used sign language. Her fingers trembled at the thought. But something inside her, maybe the memory of her mother, pushed her forward. Slowly she lifted her hands and signed, "Would you like to sit by the window?" The woman's eyes widened, then a smile, warm and surprised, spread across her face. She nodded eagerly. Leela guided her to a booth by the window where the rain tapped gently on the glass. As she handed her the menu, she signed again, "Coffee." The woman's hands fluttered in reply, graceful and practiced. "Yes, please, black." And just like that, something magical happened. The diner, usually filled with chatter and clinking cups, seemed to fade into silence as the two women communicated without a sound. The cooks peeked out from the kitchen, whispering, "Hey, is she talking with her hands?" The woman, whose name Leela would soon learn was Eleanor Whitmore, ordered a simple breakfast: toast, eggs and fruit. But she didn't eat right away. She kept watching Leela, signing softly between bites. "You're very kind," Eleanor said through her hands. "You remind me of someone I once knew." Leela smiled shyly and signed back, "Thank you. My mother was deaf too." That answer made Eleanor pause. Her eyes softened, glistening a little. She signed slowly, carefully. "Then you understand silence better than most." Leela nodded, her throat tightening. No one had ever said that to her before. When Eleanor finished her meal, she signed, "Thank you," and left a small note on the table beside the bill. Leela watched her leave, her elegant coat brushing lightly against the rain-damp doorway. When she picked up the note, she found, written in careful handwriting, "You have a gift, my dear. Never hide it again. EW." Below it, she'd left a 100 tip. Leela stood frozen, staring at the note as the bell above the door jingled softly. Later that day, her manager, a middle-aged man named Rick, raised an eyebrow when he saw the note. "Whoa, $100 for breakfast. You sure you didn't charm her?" Leela blushed. "No sir, she was just nice." Rick chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, whatever you did, keep doing it. We could use more customers like her." But Leela couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Eleanor. Something about the way she looked at her. With recognition almost. The next morning the woman returned. This time, she wasn't alone. A sleek black car pulled up outside the diner, and a chauffeur helped Eleanor out. Leela watched from inside, heart pounding. She hadn't expected to see her again. When Eleanor walked in, she smiled immediately at Leela and waved. Leela hurried over, and the two began to sign again, like old friends reunited. But this time Eleanor handed her an envelope. Leela blinked, confused. "What's this?" she asked, but Eleanor simply pointed at it and gestured, "Read later." Inside the envelope, when she opened it during her break, was a handwritten letter. "Dear Leela, you touch me more than you know. My son is a busy man, perhaps too busy. He has built an empire, but somewhere along the way, he stopped listening. I wish he could meet someone like you. Someone who still sees people with her heart. Would you come visit me at my home this weekend? I would love to talk more. There is something I want to show you. Warmly, Eleanor Whitmore." At the bottom was an address. A gated estate on the edge of the city. Leela's hands trembled as she held the letter. Eleanor Whitmore, the name sounded familiar. Then she remembered, Whitmore Holdings. One of the biggest corporations in the state. The Whitmores were billionaires. She sank into the booth, her heart racing. Why me? Outside, the rain began again, tracing soft rivers down the glass. Leela didn't know it yet, but her life, her quiet, lonely, predictable life, was about to change forever. And when she stepped into that mansion for the first time, she would unknowingly walk straight into the heart of a family torn apart by silence, and about to be healed by kindness. The next few days felt like a dream to Leela. Every time she clocked in at Molly's diner, she kept glancing at the door, half expecting the elegant woman to return. The letter from Eleanor Whitmore never left her purse, folded neatly. Its corners slightly creased from how often she took it out just to make sure it was real. Rick, her manager, had noticed her dazed look. "Hey, Space Cadet," he said, snapping his fingers as she overfilled a coffee cup. "What's going on with you? Got yourself a boyfriend finally?" Leela blushed. "No sir. Just thinking about something," Rick smirked. "Must be a good something. You've been smiling at the toast for 5 minutes." She quickly turned away, embarrassed. If she told anyone that a billionaire's mother had invited her to her mansion, they'd laugh. Or worse, they'd think she was crazy. That Saturday morning, she stood in front of her cracked bathroom mirror, staring at herself. The pale blue dress she'd chosen was simple but clean. She'd brushed her hair into loose curls, and her nervous hands smoothed the fabric for what felt like the 100th time. Her reflection stared back at her. Uncertain, small, but determined. "What if she changes her mind?" she whispered. "What if it's all a mistake?" Still, she grabbed her small purse, took a deep breath, and walked out the door. The Whitmore estate wasn't like anything Leela had ever seen. The iron gates alone looked taller than her apartment building. A uniformed guard checked her name against a list, then opened the gates with a nod. Her old car sputtered up the long tree-lined driveway, the tires crunching softly against the gravel. The mansion at the end looked like something out of a movie. Ivy-covered stone walls, towering windows, and fountains that sparkled in the autumn light. As she parked nervously beside a line of luxury cars, she almost wanted to turn back. But then she saw her, Eleanor, waiting near the entrance, her white scarf fluttering lightly in the breeze. Eleanor smiled warmly when she saw her and lifted her hands. "I'm so happy you came." Leela smiled back, signing carefully. "I wasn't sure if you really wanted me to." "Of course I did," Eleanor signed. "Come dear, I have tea waiting." Inside, the mansion felt both grand and lonely. The floors gleamed with marble, chandeliers glittered above, and yet there was a stillness in the air, as if laughter hadn't filled the halls in years. They sat together in a sunlit parlor where the fire crackled gently. A maid brought tea and scones. Bowing politely before leaving them alone, Eleanor began to sign with practiced grace. "I wanted to see you again, Leela. You reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. Gentleness." Leela's fingers moved slowly, her heart pounding. "You're very kind to say that. I didn't do anything special." Eleanor smiled softly. "You saw me. That's special. Most people look away when they see I cannot hear. You looked closer." That sentence made Leela's eyes sting. She remembered how people had done the same to her mother, speaking slower, louder, or not at all. Like silence made someone invisible. Leela nodded. "My mother was like you. People treated her differently. I guess I just didn't want to be one of them." Eleanor reached forward and took her hand. Her grip was soft yet firm. "You have a good heart, my dear." They spent hours talking through their hands. About life, about loss, about the beauty of quiet understanding. Leela learned that Eleanor had lost her hearing in her 50s after an illness, and that since then, her son had become her voice in the world. But also her wall. When Leela signed that she would love to meet him, Eleanor paused. Something flickered in her eyes. A sadness that words couldn't hold. "My son Alexander, he's a good man." She signed slowly. "But he's buried under his work. He stopped listening long before I lost my hearing." Leela frowned. "He doesn't visit." Eleanor looked down. "He sends people. Lawyers. Assistants. Gifts, but not himself." Leela didn't know what to say. It hurt her heart to imagine it. A son too busy to visit his own mother. Eleanor, however, smiled again and patted Leela's hand. "That's why I asked you here. I wanted to show him something, to remind him what kindness looks like. And maybe, if he sees it, he'll remember." Leela blinked, confused. "See what?" But before Eleanor could answer, a distant rumble of an engine echoed through the open window. She turned her head sharply, a light of anticipation in her eyes. She signed with a gentle smile. "He's here." The moment Alexander Whitmore entered the room, it felt like the air itself shifted. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark charcoal suit, his hair neatly combed, his posture commanding. He looked every bit the billionaire the newspapers described, powerful, confident, unreachable. When he saw Leela sitting beside his mother, his brows furrowed slightly. "Mother," he said, his tone polite but distant. "You didn't tell me we had company." Alano reached out and touched his arm lightly, signing something quickly. Leela watched, amazed at how fluent Eleanor was, graceful, expressive. Alexander sighed and looked at Leela. "You sign?" Leela nodded shyly. "Yes sir, my mother was deaf. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then unexpectedly, he switched to signing, his movements sharp, practiced but stiff. Thank you for speaking with her. Most people don't. Leela smiled gently. She's wonderful. I'm lucky to know her. Something flickered behind his eyes. A mixture of surprise and emotion he quickly masked. Mother doesn't usually make friends, he said aloud, glancing at Eleanor. You must be special. Eleanor signed something teasingly and Leela chuckled before translating. She says you sound jealous. Alexander's eyes widened slightly, then for the first time, he smiled. A real one. Touch A. The three of them sat together for tea. Leela could feel the tension between mother and son, but also a deep love underneath it. Like a bridge that had been broken but still stood on both sides, waiting to be rebuilt. As they talked, Eleanor signed more than she spoke, her hands moving like poetry. Leela translated when Alexander couldn't keep up, her voice soft but sure. At one point Eleanor signed, you see Alex. This is what I meant. The world doesn't stop because we can't hear it, it just speaks differently. Alexander looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. I know mother, he said quietly. But his voice carried something, guilt, maybe regret. Leela sensed it but said nothing. As the evening grew darker, Eleanor invited Leela to stay for dinner. The dining room table looked like it could seat 20, though only the three of them sat there. The soft light from the chandelier shimmered off the silver cutlery. Leela was nervous but Eleanor kept the mood light. She signed little jokes and Leela laughed, translating for Alexander. Slowly the billionaire's stiff expression softened. His eyes, once guarded, began to warm every time his mother smiled. At one point Eleanor leaned close to Leela and signed privately. He hasn't laughed like this in years. That sentence nearly broke Leela's heart. When the meal ended, Alexander stood and said, I'll have the driver take you home, Miss Parker. Oh, that's not necessary, Leela said quickly. I can drive myself. He hesitated, then nodded. As you wish. Eleanor hugged her before she left, her frail hands trembling slightly. She signed softly, you brought light into this house today. Leela smiled through the lump in her throat. You did that yourself. As she walked out, Alexander followed her to the door. The night air was crisp, the sky glowing with city lights in the distance. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. You really made her happy, he said, his voice softer now. She's been lonely. I think she just needed someone to listen, Leela replied. He looked at her thoughtfully. Most people don't know how to do that anymore. Leela shrugged lightly. Sometimes listening doesn't need words. For a moment their eyes met. Two worlds apart, yet somehow connected by silence. Then Alexander smiled faintly. Good night, Miss Parker. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. As she drove away, Leela caught a glimpse of Eleanor through the window, sitting by the fire, smiling quietly to herself, her fingers moving slowly and signing. Thank you. Sunday mornings at Molly's diner were always a blur of laughter, chatter and clinking dishes. But for Leela Parker, that day felt slower, softer, as if the world had decided to breathe for a moment. Her mind wasn't in the diner. It was still in the grand marble halls of the Whitmore mansion. She kept replaying the moments over and over. Eleanor's gentle hands signing stories from her past, Alexander's guarded smile slowly melting by the firelight, and the quiet gratitude that lingered in the air when she left. She hadn't expected to be invited back. But part of her heart hoped she would be. As she poured coffee for a table of regulars, her coworker Marcy nudged her shoulder. Hey, Leela, you've been staring at that sugar jar for like 3 minutes. Leela blinked and laughed awkwardly. Sorry, long night? Huh, Marcy teased, leaning closer. Does this have anything to do with the fancy woman who left you $100 tip? The one in the pearls? Leela's cheeks flushed. She's just a kind lady. Her name's Eleanor. Marcy raised an eyebrow. Kind lady with a coiffure. Sounds more like royalty to me. Before Leela could respond, the diner door opened, and conversation died mid-sentence. A tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit stepped inside, looking completely out of place among the checkered floors and chrome stools. His presence drew every eye in the room. It was Alexander Whitmore. For a second Leela thought she was imagining it. But when he scanned the diner and his eyes landed on her, his expression softened into something between relief and purpose. Miss Parker, he said, his voice warm but commanding. May I have a word? Rick, the manager, practically dropped his pen. Sure thing, sir. You want a table? Alexander smiled politely. No thank you, just Miss Parker. Whispers erupted among the customers as Leela wiped her hands on her apron and followed him outside, her heart racing. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of coffee and rain-soaked pavement. Alexander turned to face her, his expression calm but unreadable. I hope I'm not interrupting your work, he said. Leela shook her head. No, not at all. Is your mother okay? She's fine, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. More than fine actually, she hasn't stopped talking about you. That made Leela blush. She's very sweet, he nodded. Then, after a moment, he added quietly. She wants to see you again. Leela's eyes widened. She does, yes, he said. She asked if you could come by this afternoon. She said it was important. Her heart began to thump faster. Of course, I'd be honored. Alexander looked at her for a moment, as if studying something about her, then nodded. Good. My driver will pick you up at 2. And before she could say anything else, he turned and walked to his car, a sleek black Mercedes that glided away like a shadow on wheels. Leela stood on the curb trying to steady her breath. The whispers from inside the diner spilled through the glass. Marcy's exaggerated gasp among them, but Leela didn't hear them. All she could think was, why does Eleanor want to see me again so soon? At precisely 2 o'clock, the black car returned. The driver, the same one who'd opened the mansion gates before, greeted her politely and held the door. This time, as the car wound through the city, Leela didn't feel nervous. She felt curious. When she arrived, Eleanor was waiting in her favorite spot by the sunroom window, a book in her lap. She beamed when Leela entered and motioned for her to sit. Leela smiled and began to sign. It's good to see you again. Eleanor's hands danced in reply. You too, dear. Thank you for coming. I needed your help today. Leela tilted her head. My help? Eleanor nodded. With something only someone who listens can do. Before Lila could ask what that meant, the door opened, and Alexander entered the room. He looked less formal today. No suit jacket, sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. Still, he carried the air of a man used to control. Mother? He said softly, then glanced at Leela. You're here. Eleanor smiled and signed something rapidly. Leela translated, her voice gentle. She says she wanted us both here. She has something to share. Alexander raised a brow. Something to share. Eleanor motioned for both of them to sit. When they did, she took a deep breath, then began signing, her movements deliberate, emotional. Leela's eyes followed carefully, her voice translating each word aloud so Alexander could follow. When I lost my hearing, Eleanor began, I thought I'd lost my world, but the truth is, the silence wasn't what hurt the most. It was people's fear of it. Everyone around me became quieter, not out of respect, but out of discomfort, except one person. Your father. Alexander looked down, his jaw tightening slightly. Eleanor continued, he learned to sign with me. Every night, we'd sit by the fire and he'd tell me stories with his hands. When he passed, it felt like the world stopped speaking again. Her fingers trembled slightly. Leela hesitated, tears threatening to rise as she kept translating. You were there for me, Alex. But when the company grew, when the board took over, you began to drift away. I know you didn't mean to, but your silence hurt more than mine ever did. Alexander's throat moved, but no words came out. His eyes glistened faintly. Then Eleanor turned to Leela and took her hand gently. When I met this young woman, she signed, I saw something I'd been missing for years. Compassion without expectation. The language of the heart. She reminded me what it felt like to be heard. Leela's voice cracked slightly as she spoke the last word. Eleanor released her hand, then turned back to her son. I wanted you to see it, Alex. Not to shame you, but to show you what kindness looks like when it's real. You've spent so long talking to the world you forgot how to listen. The silence that followed was heavy. Not awkward, but sacred. The kind that carried meaning. Alexander exhaled slowly, his hand rising to cover his mouth for a moment. He looked at Leela, his expression raw, conflicted. Then he looked at his mother. I never meant to make you feel that way, he said softly. I thought I was protecting you by building something for you. Eleanor smiled sadly, her hands moving. What I wanted was not your success, Alexander. I wanted your company. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, then looked at Leela again. She told you all of this before. Leela shook her head. No, she wanted to tell you. Eleanor reached across the small table and held both their hands, her frail fingers trembling slightly between their warmth. Please, she signed, don't let the world make you forget how to love. Speak with your heart, not your schedule. A tears blurred Leela's vision. Alexander sat still for a long moment, his jaw set, his hand still gripping his mother's. Then, quietly, he began to sign. His movements were clumsy at first, uncertain, but heartfelt. I love you, Mom. Eleanor's eyes filled instantly. She replied in sign. I love you too, my boy. Leela could barely hold back her tears. There was something so intimate, so sacred about watching them reconnect, mother and son speaking not through sound but through shared silence. Later, as the sun dipped low, Leela helped Eleanor to her favorite chair. Alexander stood nearby, quieter than before, his usual composure replaced by something more human. When Leela prepared to leave, Eleanor hugged her tightly and whispered, though faintly, against her ear. The first word she'd spoken aloud since Leela had known her. Thank you, my dear. Lila's breath caught. She hugged her back, tears spilling freely now. When she turned to leave, Alexander followed her out to the door again, the air between them heavy with gratitude. She hasn't spoken like that in years, he said quietly. I don't know what you did, but thank you. Leela smiled gently. I didn't do anything, Mr. Whitmore. She just needed to be reminded she's still heard. He studied her face, the soft sincerity in her eyes, the calm strength in her voice, and for a brief moment, something shifted behind his gaze. You know, he said, you're not what I expected. Leela blinked. What did you expect? He smiled faintly. Someone ordinary. Her heart fluttered, but she said nothing. Instead, she smiled, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and replied softly, "Maybe I am." As she walked down the steps toward the waiting car, Alexander watched her go. Hands in his pockets, eyes distant. While inside the mansion, Eleanor sat by the window, watching them both with a knowing smile, because for the first time in a long, long while there was life and love in the Whitmore home again. The following week passed like a slow-turning dream. Back at Molly's diner, nothing had changed. The same jingling bell, the same smell of bacon and coffee. Yet everything felt different to Leila Parker. Ever since that day at the Whitmore mansion, her mind carried a warmth she couldn't explain. The way Eleanor Whitmore's hands had trembled while signing "I love you," the quiet tears in Alexander's eyes, the moment of silence that had spoken more than any words could. All of it had stayed with her like a secret song. She'd witnessed something sacred, a family rediscovering love through the language of silence. And yet, she didn't expect what would happen next. It started with a headline. On Thursday morning, as she served coffee to a group of regulars, Marcy burst through the diner doors holding her phone like it was on fire. "Lila," she shouted, "you're on the news." Half the customers turned to look. Leila nearly dropped a tray of pancakes. "What?" Marcy hurried over and thrust her phone in front of her face. There on the small screen was a photograph. Lila, standing beside Eleanor Whitmore at the gates of the mansion. The headline read, "Billionaire's mother reconnects with local waitress." The story behind the viral friendship. Leila's heart froze. She scrolled through the article with trembling fingers. It described her as a modest waitress who captured the heart of a billionaire's mother through sign language. The story painted her as some kind of miracle worker. The woman who helped reunite a powerful man and his reclusive mother. "Oh no," she whispered, panic flooding her chest. I didn't mean for this." Rick, her manager, looked over her shoulder and whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. You're famous, kid." "I don't want to be famous," Leila said quickly, her voice trembling. "This wasn't supposed to." Marcy grinned. "Girl, do you realize what this means? You're like a real-life angel or something." The comments section is full of people crying. Leila shook her head. "They don't even know me." "Maybe," Marcy said softly, "but they know what you did. And maybe that's enough." Still, Leila's heart was pounding. The thought of attention made her sick. She wasn't built for cameras or headlines. She just wanted peace, the kind that came with small acts done quietly. But peace was the last thing she would get. That afternoon, as she finished her shift, a sleek black car pulled up again outside the diner. This time it wasn't the driver who came in. It was Alexander Whitmore himself. Every fork in the diner froze midair. Rick muttered under his breath, "What is this, a movie?" Alexander walked in like someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Confident, calm, and carrying an energy that drew every gaze. When he saw Leila, his face softened. "Miss Parker." Leila quickly untied her apron. "Mixed. Whitmore, what are you doing here?" He gestured toward the door. "Can we talk?" The whispers erupted the moment they stepped outside. Cameras flashed from across the street. Journalists, probably tipped off after the story broke. Leila winced as one of them shouted her name. Alexander frowned and motioned for his driver to open the door. "Let's go somewhere quiet." Inside the car, the noise faded into silence. Leila sat stiffly, clutching her purse as the city blurred past outside. "I'm sorry about the article," Alexander said finally, his tone sincere. "It wasn't supposed to happen. Someone at the estate must have leaked a photo." Leila let out a shaky breath. "People at work think I'm some kind of hero. I'm not. I just spoke to your mother." Alexander smiled faintly. "That's exactly why she likes you." Leila turned to him, confused. "What do you mean?" He looked out the window. "Most people treat her like she's fragile or broken. You didn't. You saw her." His words hung in the air for a moment. Leila looked down, her cheeks warm. "I didn't do anything special. I just listened." "That," he said quietly, "is special." They drove in silence for a moment before Leila asked, "Is she upset about the article?" "No," Alexander said, glancing at her. "Actually, she's proud. She's been reading the comments all morning. Well, having someone read them to her. She says the world finally sees kindness again." Leila smiled softly. "She's incredible." Alexander nodded. "Yes, she is." Then he added, after a pause, "She wants you to come again tonight. We're having a small dinner, no press, no cameras. Just us." Leila hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," he said firmly. "You're invited." Something in his tone, gentle, but certain, made her heart flutter. She nodded slowly. "Okay." That evening Leila found herself once again walking through the Whitmore mansion's glowing halls. But this time the air felt different. There was laughter echoing faintly from the dining room, genuine laughter. When she entered, Eleanor beamed and signed cheerfully, "My favorite guest has arrived." Leila laughed, signing back, "You'll make your son jealous." Alexander, standing nearby, smiled. Too late. Dinner was warm and lively. Eleanor seemed brighter, her hands more animated, her eyes sparkling as she told stories from her younger years. Alexander translated sometimes but often just watched her, captivated. Leela felt at ease. Part of something beautiful and rare. When dessert was finished, Eleanor excused herself for a short rest, leaving Leela and Alexander alone by the fire. The crackling flames filled the silence between them. She looks happier? Leela said quietly. She is, Alexander replied. You've done more for her in a week than I could in years. Leela shook her head. I think she just needed someone new to listen to her stories. He studied her, his gaze deep and thoughtful. You really don't see what you do you? Leela blinked. What do you mean? He leaned back, his voice low. You walk into people's lives, and you make them remember how to feel. You did it for her, and now, he hesitated. I think you're doing it for me too. Her breath caught. Mr. Whitmore. Alexander, he corrected softly. She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Alexander, I don't know what to say. He smiled gently. You don't have to say anything. For a moment neither of them moved. The firelight danced across his face, softening his sharp features. He looked less like the billionaire from the papers, and more like a man who had forgotten what warmth felt like. Until now. Then Eleanor's voice, faint but cheerful, called from the hallway. Don't sit too close to the fire. You'll melt the ice between you. They both burst into laughter, the moment breaking beautifully. Later that night, after saying goodbye, Leela stepped out into the cool air. The mansion lights glowed behind her like a dream fading into reality. Alexander walked her to the car again. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for having me. He hesitated, then added, would you mind if I visited the diner sometime? Without the cameras this time. Leela smiled shyly. I'd like that. He nodded, his lips curving into a small, sincere smile. Then I'll see you soon, Miss Parker. As she got into the car, Leela couldn't help glancing back. He was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching the car disappear into the night. By morning the story had spread even further. The waitress who taught a billionaire's family to listen. Some called it heartwarming. Others called it luck. But Leela didn't care about the noise anymore. She knew the truth. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about connection. And deep down, even if she didn't dare admit it yet, she had started to care about Alexander Whitmore. Not the billionaire, not the story. But the man who was learning, slowly, sincerely, to listen again. 3 days passed before Alexander Whitmore showed up again at Molly's diner. Leela was refilling coffee cups when she heard the familiar jingle of the bell. But this time, the usual chatter in the diner stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the door. There he was, tall, immaculate in a charcoal coat, a quiet storm of composure among the clatter of plates and laughter. But when his eyes found her, that composure softened instantly. Morning, Miss Parker, he said, his voice low and warm. Leela froze, holding the coffee pot like a shield. You're really not big on warning people, are you? He smiled slightly. I thought surprises were supposed to be charming. Not when they involve billionaires walking into diners full of gossip-hungry customers. He glanced around. They seem harmless enough. A man from the corner booth whispered loudly, that's him, the Whitmore guy, the one with the mansion. Leela sighed. See what I mean? Alexander chuckled. Point taken. He motioned toward an empty booth by the window. May I? Leela hesitated. You're asking to sit in my section. That's risky. I'll take my chances. She poured his coffee and tried to pretend her hands weren't shaking. The air around him seemed charged, though he didn't say much. He just watched her with quiet interest, as if fascinated by the normalcy of it all. The clinking cups, the smell of eggs and syrup, the hum of a jukebox playing some old country tune. You look different, he said after a while. She frowned. Different how? Calmer, happier. Leela raised an eyebrow. You barely know me. I've learned enough to notice, he said simply. Before she could answer, her manager Rick appeared, wiping his hands on a towel. Mr. Whitmore, he said with a polite grin, an honor to have you here. Anything special you'd like today? Alexander looked at Leela. Whatever she recommends. Leela sighed. All right then, 1 plate of blueberry pancakes. How's special? Rick nodded approvingly. Coming right up. As she turned to go, Alexander spoke again, softer this time. My mother wanted me to tell you, she misses you. She's been asking if you could visit again soon. Leela smiled, her heart warming. I'd love to. He nodded as if relieved. She's been more active lately. Started going outside, walking the gardens. She even convinced the staff to have tea with her yesterday. I haven't seen her so alive in years. That's wonderful, Leela said, genuinely happy. She's such a beautiful soul. Alexander's expression softened. You really mean that? Of course I do. For a moment, their eyes met. The kind of gaze that said more than words could. Then Leela looked away, pretending to busy herself with the napkin dispenser. When she returned with his pancakes, he thanked her, but there was something different in his tone. Something unspoken, hanging in the quiet between them. After he finished, Alexander stood to leave but hesitated. Miss Parker, he said, slipping his hands into his pockets, would you join me for a charity gala this weekend? Leela blinked. A gala? Yes, my foundation is hosting it for children with hearing impairments. My mother will be attending, she insisted, actually. She said, and I quote, "Don't you dare go without Leela." Leela laughed softly. Your mother is very persuasive. She gets that from me, he said, half smiling. So will you come? She hesitated. Alexander, I don't belong in those kinds of places. I'm a waitress, not what? He interrupted gently. Not someone who deserves to be seen. His words hit deeper than she expected. She stared at him, caught between embarrassment and something tender. I just don't want to embarrass you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You could never embarrass me. Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could find a reply, he added, It's not about appearances, Leela. It's about heart, and you have more of that than anyone I've ever met. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. All right, I'll come. A small, genuine smile spread across his face. Good, I'll send someone to help with preparations. I can handle my own dress, she said quickly. I don't doubt that, he said, smirking. But my mother will insist otherwise. Leela laughed. I'm starting to think she's running your life. Only the parts she cares about, he said, eyes glinting with amusement. He left soon after, leaving behind a diner full of whispers and a waitress who couldn't stop smiling, though she tried her best to hide it. That night, as Leela walked home through the cool air, she replayed his words in her mind. You could never embarrass me. Why did that line feel so heavy, so personal? For most of her life she'd blended in, quiet, careful, never drawing attention. Her world was small but safe at the diner, her apartment, the sound of rain against her window. She didn't belong in glittering halls with chandeliers and champagne, and yet for the first time she wanted to. Not for the glamour. For him. Saturday arrived faster than expected. When the black car came to pick her up, she was ready. Though she barely recognized herself. The silver dress shimmered like moonlight, her hair softly curled, her eyes lined just enough to reveal their quiet fire. The driver opened the door for her at the entrance of the Whitmore Foundation Gala, where lights and laughter spilled into the night. Alexander was waiting at the top of the stairs. And for a brief moment, he forgot how to breathe. Miss Parker, he said finally, voice low, you look incredible. She blushed, clutching her small clutch bag. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Whitmore. He smiled. Ready. As I'll ever be. They entered together, the crowd parting slightly as whispers followed them. Journalists recognized him instantly, but Alexander waved them off politely. His focus was entirely on her, guiding her through the sea of glitter and sound, making sure she felt safe. Eleanor spotted them from across the room and beamed, signing enthusiastically, There she is, the star of the evening. Leela laughed, walking over to hug her. You look lovely, Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor signed, Please call me Eleanor. And you look radiant. Alexander watched the exchange with quiet affection. You two are quite the pair. Eleanor gave her son a teasing look and signed quickly, and though Leela was still learning, she caught enough to blush deeply. What did she say? Alexander asked, frowning. Leela laughed. Something about you needing to smile more when I'm around. Eleanor winked, and Alexander groaned. She's impossible. Leela grinned. You love it. As the night unfolded, Leela found herself relaxing, even laughing. She spoke with guests, shared stories with Eleanor, and watched as Alexander's hard exterior seemed to melt under the soft glow of the evening. He wasn't just the billionaire tonight. He was a man rediscovering joy. Then came the moment that silenced the entire ballroom. During a short speech, Alexander took the microphone and looked toward his mother, who smiled proudly from her seat. Tonight, he said, it's about communication, not just with words but with the heart. And I've recently been reminded that the greatest language in the world is kindness. He looked directly at Leela. And in that moment, every camera in the room turned to follow his gaze. She taught me that, he said simply. The room erupted into applause. Eleanor clapped, tears glimmering in her eyes. Leela felt her own heart swell with emotion, unsure whether to smile or cry. For once, she didn't hide. After the gala, they stepped out onto the terrace. The city lights shimmered like a field of stars. Thank you for coming, Alexander said softly. Thank you for inviting me, she replied. It was magical. He turned to face her. You've changed my mother's life, Leela. And mine too. She blinked, unsure if she heard him right. What do you mean? He hesitated. Then smiled. I'll tell you someday. Leela laughed softly. That's unfair. Maybe, he said. But some truths deserve the right moment. They stood there in silence, the wind gently moving through her hair, the city humming below them, and though neither said it, something unspoken passed between them, fragile but real. The kind of connection that needed no words at all. The days after the gala passed like a gentle storm, beautiful, unsettling, and impossible to ignore. Everywhere Leela went, people whispered her name. At the diner, customers who once ordered without a word now smiled and said, You're the girl from the Whitmore Gala. Online, photos of her standing beside Alexander and Eleanor had gone viral again. But for Leela, none of that mattered. What stayed with her wasn't the lights or applause. It was that moment on the terrace. The way Alexander had looked at her, like she was the only quiet place in a noisy world. Still, something about him lingered in mystery. He was kind, yes. But behind his steady eyes there was always a trace of sadness. Something he carried silently, like a shadow that refused to leave. And Leela, with her gentle heart, couldn't stop wondering what it was. One evening she was closing up the diner when the bell over the door chimed softly. She didn't have to look to know who it was. "Working late again?" Alexander asked, stepping inside. "Someone's got to keep this place running," she said with a smile. "What brings you here at this hour?" He hesitated before answering. "A walk and maybe some company." Leela gestured toward the counter. "Then you came to the right place." He sat down, loosening his tie, and for a while they said nothing. The diner was nearly empty. Just the two of them, the smell of coffee and the hum of the neon sign outside. "Rough day?" she asked softly. He nodded, looking down at his hands. "Meetings, deadlines, people who talk more than they listen? Sounds exhausting." "It is," he said quietly. "That's why I like coming here. You don't ask for anything." Leela smiled faintly. "That's not true. I charge you for pancakes." That earned a small chuckle from him. Fair point. But when the laughter faded, silence filled the space again. Heavier this time. Leela could feel he wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Alexander," she said gently, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, surprised. "Of course," she hesitated. "Why does your mother call you my quiet boy? She signs it sometimes when she looks at you." He froze, just for a moment, and then sighed. "She still calls me that, huh?" Leela nodded, watching his face carefully. "Yes. Is there a story behind it?" He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "There is. One I haven't told anyone in years." The air seemed to shift around them, softer, sadder. "I wasn't always this quiet," he began. "When I was a kid I was loud. Full of questions, full of energy. My father used to say I'd talk the paint off the walls." Leela smiled at the image. "What changed?" He paused, his jaw tightening. "When I was 12, my mother lost her hearing. It happened suddenly, an infection that went wrong. One day she could hear me laughing, the next, silence." Leela's heart ached at his tone. "That must have been so hard." "It was," he said softly. "Harder for her though. My father didn't handle it well." He grew distant, frustrated. "I tried to help but I was a kid. I didn't know how. I'd talk and talk, and she couldn't understand me anymore. So eventually I stopped talking." Leela blinked. "You stopped talking?" He nodded. "For nearly a year. Teachers thought I was traumatized. My mother thought I resented her. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared that if I spoke it would remind her of what she lost." There was a tremor in his voice that made Leela's throat tighten. "I started learning sign language on my own," he continued. "Books, videos, whatever I could find. When I finally signed to her for the first time she cried for an hour. That's when she started calling me her quiet boy, because silence became our language." Leela's eyes shimmered with tears. "That's beautiful and heartbreaking." He gave a small, sad smile. "It shaped everything. I built my world around control, around precision. Business, money, order, things I could fix. But emotions," he shook his head, "those still scare me." Leela was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "You don't have to be afraid with me." The simplicity of her words seemed to disarm him. He looked at her, really looked, as though searching for the truth in her eyes. And what he found there made his breath catch. No judgment, no pity. Just warmth. "Leela," he said quietly, "you make it sound easy." She smiled softly. "It's not easy. But it's worth it." They talked for hours after that. About his mother, his work, his dreams, even about her late father, who used to play harmonica in their small town until he got sick. By the time they realized how late it was, the sky outside had turned a deep shade of indigo. "I should get you home," Alexander said, standing reluctantly. "I can walk," she replied. He shook his head. "Not at this hour." "Please, let me?" Leela hesitated, then nodded. "All right." The drive was quiet but not awkward. It was the kind of silence that felt shared. Two people existing peacefully in the same space. When the car stopped outside her apartment, Leela turned to him. "Thank you for trusting me." He looked at her, his voice soft. "Thank you for listening." As she reached for the door, his hand brushed hers, accidental, but electric. Both froze, eyes meeting in the dim glow of the streetlight. "Good night, Alexander," she whispered. "Good night, Leela," he said, his voice barely audible. She stepped out, her heart thudding in her chest. As the car pulled away, she looked up at the stars and smiled. Something had shifted tonight, something real. Over the next week things changed quietly but deeply. Alexander started visiting more often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to sit in the corner booth while she worked. He'd bring his laptop, take calls, and every now and then, glance up just to catch her smile. Eleanor too began sending little gifts to the diner, homemade cookies, handwritten notes in elegant cursive, even a small bracelet with a charm shaped like a heart and hand. The message was clear: your family now. But as much as Leela's world was brightening, Alexander's was growing complicated. His board of directors had begun to whisper. The tabloids were stirring up gossip about the billionaire and the waitress. Investors called it a distraction. And though Alexander pretended not to care, Leela could see the weight of it pressing on him. One night after the diner closed, he sat with her again. His shoulders were tense, his eyes distant. "They think I've lost focus," he said bitterly. "That being seen with you is bad for business." Leela's chest tightened. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Don't say that," he said quickly. "You didn't do anything wrong. But if people think—" "I don't care what they think," he interrupted, his voice sharper than usual. Then he softened. "I only care what's true." She met his gaze quietly. "And what is true?" He hesitated. Then, for the first time, he let the walls fall completely. "What's true," he said slowly, "is that I haven't felt this alive in years, not since before my mother lost her hearing. Not since before I built walls around myself and called it success." Her breath caught. "Alexander," he exhaled, shaking his head. "I'm not saying this right. I don't want to hide anymore. Not from my feelings, not from you." The air between them thickened with emotion. Neither moved, neither spoke, and yet everything changed in that single, trembling silence. Finally, Leela reached across the counter and placed her hand gently over his. "Then don't," she whispered. Outside the night was cold. But inside that small, glowing diner, where a billionaire and a waitress sat hand in hand, something warm was beginning to take root. Something fragile yet powerful enough to make even the quietest hearts believe in second chances. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos, and so did Leela Parker. She was halfway through her shift when her phone started buzzing nonstop. At first, she ignored it. Then Marcy, her co-worker, ran out from the back room, eyes wide. "Leela, you need to see this right now." Leela frowned. "What's wrong?" Marcy turned her phone toward her. The screen showed a tabloid headline in bold letters: "Billionaire Alexander Whitmore's secret relationship with small-town waitress. Photos reveal late-night meetings." Leela froze. The article was filled with pictures, grainy shots of Alexander sitting in her booth walking her home. Even that night when he'd driven her back to her apartment. They made it look like a scandal. Her hands shook. "This can't be happening." Marcy bit her lip. "They're saying you're after his money, that you planned this." Leela's stomach twisted. "What? That's ridiculous." Rick, the manager, came over grim-faced. "Leela, the phone's been ringing off the hook. Reporters, bloggers, even news networks. They all want your side of the story." She felt dizzy, the walls closing in. I don't." Marcy placed a hand on her arm. "Hey. Breathe. You didn't do anything wrong." But the noise outside said otherwise. Through the diner's windows she could already see a few photographers gathering near the door. "Rick, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Go," he said quietly. "Get out of here before they make a circus of this place." Leela nodded shakily, untied her apron and slipped out the back door. Heart pounding, tears threatening to spill. Meanwhile at Whitmore Enterprises, Alexander was storming through the boardroom. "Who leaked this?" he demanded, slamming the newspaper onto the table. The directors exchanged nervous glances. "Mr. Whitmore," one began cautiously, "perhaps the real issue isn't who leaked it, but what it looks like." Alexander's eyes flashed. "What it looks like?" Another board member cleared his throat. "The media is painting it as an inappropriate relationship. Investors are nervous. They're asking whether personal distractions are affecting your judgment." "My judgment?" Alexander shot back. "You think compassion is a liability?" The room fell silent. He leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "Leela Parker is a decent, kind-hearted woman who's done more for this family than any of you ever will. If the investors can't handle that, I'll buy them out myself." There was a stunned silence. "Mr. Whitmore," one said carefully, "please reconsider. This could damage your reputation." Alexander straightened, his tone icy. "Then maybe it's time my reputation matched who I really am." And with that, he walked out, ignoring the flashing cameras that awaited him in the lobby. By evening, Leela's small apartment had become a trap. Reporters crowded the front of her building, shouting her name, waving microphones. The online world had already chosen sides, half calling her a gold digger, the other half calling it a modern fairy tale. Neither felt real, neither felt right. Her phone rang again. This time it wasn't Marcy, it was Eleanor Whitmore. Leela hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Leela dear," Eleanor signed over video call, her hands trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" Tears filled Leela's eyes. "I don't know. Everyone's saying terrible things. I didn't mean for any of this." Eleanor shook her head firmly, signing, "None of this is your fault. Don't let them make you believe that." "But Alexander, what about his business, his reputation?" Eleanor smiled sadly. "My son built his empire on silence. Maybe it's time the world finally hears what kind of man he truly is." Leela bit her lip, whispering, "He's going to get hurt because of me?" Eleanor signed gently, "No, my dear. He's finally living because of you." The next morning Alexander showed up at Leela's door. Her heart jumped the moment she saw him, dressed simply, eyes tired but determined. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "There are reporters everywhere." "I don't care," he replied. I needed to see you. She stepped aside. Come in. Inside, the air was tense. She stood by the window, arms crossed. They're saying awful things, Alexander, about both of us. I know. They're calling me her voice broke, a manipulator. Someone who planned this for attention. He took a slow step toward her. You don't have to explain yourself. But your business. Let them talk. He interrupted. The truth doesn't need defending. Leela turned to face him, tears in her eyes. You can't just ignore this. It could ruin everything you've worked for. He hesitated, then said softly, Leela, everything I've worked for feels meaningless compared to what I've found with you. Her heart stopped. Alexander. I spent years building walls so no one could reach me, he said. And then you walked in, with your quiet voice, your kindness, your honesty, and you tore them down without even trying. Leela's breath trembled. And what happens when the world tears you down because of me? Then let it, he said simply. Because for once, I'm not afraid of being seen. She stared at him, at the man who once hid behind silence now standing unashamed before chaos, and realized he meant every word. He stepped closer, gently cupping her face. Leela, I've lived in noise my whole life. But with you, I finally found peace. Her tears fell freely now. I don't know what to do, he smiled softly. You don't have to do anything. Just trust me. And then, for the first time, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed or desperate, it was slow, certain, and filled with everything they hadn't said. The noise outside, the cameras, the chaos, disappeared, leaving only warmth and silence. When they finally pulled apart, Leela whispered, "What happens now?" Alexander smiled faintly. "Now I tell the truth." The following evening, Alexander called a press conference. Reporters flooded the hall, cameras flashing, voices overlapping, all waiting for the man whose personal life had become the world's obsession. When he stepped up to the podium, the room hushed instantly. He began simply. "I'm not here to deny anything." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I've been seen with Leela Parker," he continued. "She's not my employee. She's not a scandal. She's a woman who showed my family what kindness looks like, and reminded me what it means to live with purpose." A journalist called out, "Mr. Whitmore, are you confirming you're in a relationship?" Alexander smiled faintly. "I'm confirming that I've met someone extraordinary. Someone who doesn't care about my title, my money, or my world. Only the person I've tried to hide behind it all." Flashbulbs exploded. The room buzzed with energy. He raised a hand to quiet them. "And if anyone here believes compassion is a weakness, then perhaps it's time you learn to listen. Truly listen, before you judge." Then, without another word, he stepped away from the podium and left the room in stunned silence. That night, Leela watched the press conference replay on her old TV, tears running freely down her cheeks. He hadn't just defended her, he had stood for her against everything. A soft knock came at her door. When she opened it, Alexander stood there, rain dripping from his coat, eyes tired but bright. "Hey," he said softly. She smiled through her tears. "Hey," he held out his hand. "Come with me, we're home." Her breath caught. "Home." He nodded. "Where my mother's waiting with cocoa and too many questions." She laughed through her tears, taking his hand. "You sure about this?" He squeezed her hand gently. "I've never been more sure of anything." And together, they stepped out into the rain, hand in hand, while the world for once fell silent. Rain whispered against the car windows as Alexander drove through the quiet suburbs, Leela's hand resting gently in his. Neither spoke for a while. Words weren't needed. The silence between them was soft, comfortable. A language of its own. When they pulled up to the Whitmore estate, the lights inside glowed warm and golden, as if the house itself was waiting for them. Leela hesitated before stepping out. "Are you sure I should be here right now? After everything that's happened?" Alexander squeezed her hand. "You belong here more than half the people who've ever visited this house." Her chest tightened. He meant it. Inside, Eleanor Whitmore stood waiting in the grand hallway, her silver hair pulled back neatly, her hands trembling just slightly with anticipation. When she saw Leela, her entire face softened. Eleanor opened her arms. Leela stepped into the embrace without hesitation. It felt like coming home. Eleanor signed gently, "You're safe here, my dear. Don't let the noise outside steal your peace." Leela nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you." Alexander stood a few steps away, watching the two women who had unknowingly changed his life. One by giving him life, the other by giving it meaning. After dinner, when Leela was helping Eleanor clear the dishes, Alexander disappeared into his office. She didn't think much of it at first. Until Eleanor signed with a knowing smile. "He's preparing something." "Preparing what?" Leela asked, curious. Eleanor only winked. Moments later, Alexander returned holding something wrapped in soft cloth. He looked a little nervous, something Leela had rarely seen. "What's that?" she asked. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a small hand-carved wooden box, smooth and elegant. On the lid, faintly engraved, was a pattern of hands intertwined. "I made this," he said quietly. "Or tried to." Leela smiled softly. "You carved it." "During the nights I couldn't sleep," he admitted. When I kept thinking about how to say the things I never could. He opened the box. Inside were 3 folded papers. Old, yellowed slightly at the edges, written in uneven, careful handwriting. She looked up. "What are these?" "Letters," he said. "For my mother, for you, and for myself." He handed the first to Eleanor, who unfolded it with trembling hands. As she read, tears rolled down her cheeks. She reached up, touched his face, and signed through her tears, "I always knew you had a voice, my son. Even when you didn't use it." Alexander smiled gently, eyes shining. Then he turned to Leela and handed her the second letter. Her hand shook slightly as she unfolded it. The words were written in neat, bold strokes. "Leela, you taught me that silence isn't emptiness. It's the space where real things grow. I spent years listening without hearing, watching without feeling, living without meaning, and then you walked in with that laugh, that kindness, that ridiculous apron with coffee stains. You looked at me, and for the first time, I felt seen. You once told me that love speaks without words. I didn't believe it until you. Now, I want to learn the only language that ever mattered, yours. Alexander." Leela's tears fell onto the page before she could stop them. She looked up, and saw him standing in front of her, hands shaking slightly as he lifted them and began to sign. His movements were slow, clumsy, but deliberate. "I love you." Leela gasped softly, covering her mouth with both hands. He signed again, clearer this time, eyes glistening. "I love you, Leela Parker." For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The noise outside, the rumors, the flashing lights, the doubt, faded until there was only this moment, this truth, this man learning to speak the language of love. Leela reached up, touching his face gently. Then she signed back, "I love you too." Eleanor stood by the doorway, smiling through tears, her heart full. For years, she had prayed her son would find someone who could reach him. Someone who didn't see his silence as a barrier but as a doorway. Tonight, that prayer had been answered. The following weeks brought changes no one expected. The media that once ridiculed them began to shift tone after Alexander's public honesty. Headlines transformed from "scandalous affair" to "Whitmore redefines leadership, a billionaire's stand for humanity." Investors returned, not out of greed but respect. More importantly, Alexander launched a foundation in his mother's name. The Eleanor Whitmore Institute for Silent Communication. Dedicated to supporting families with hearing impaired children and funding education in sign language across hospitals and schools. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Alexander stood beside Leela and Eleanor. He didn't speak much, he didn't need to. Instead, he raised his hands and signed his opening words. "To speak is human. To understand is love." The crowd fell silent, many wiping their eyes. Eleanor reached for Leela's hand, whispering softly, "He's finally free." Leela nodded, eyes glistening. "Yes. And so am I." Months later, one evening, Leela found herself walking through the gardens behind the Whitmore mansion. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Alexander joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You still take it with too much sugar," he teased. She smiled. "And you still pretend you don't like that." He chuckled softly. "Fair." They sat on a wooden bench beneath the oak tree where he used to spend hours alone as a child. The same spot where he had once told her he was afraid of losing her. Now the silence between them was peaceful. Not empty. He glanced at her, eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how strange it all is? That it took 100 doctors, 1,000 meetings, and one waitress to fix what money couldn't?" She smiled. Maybe it didn't need fixing. Or maybe it just needed understanding. He turned toward her, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to us." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then promise me something." "Anything, no more hiding, no more silence." He smiled softly. "Deal." They sat together as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and for once, in a world obsessed with noise, their silence was perfect. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Whitmore Foundation's first anniversary drew hundreds of guests, doctors, parents, children, all gathered in celebration of a cause born from love, not fame. Leela stood at the podium, nervous but radiant. Eleanor watched proudly from the front row, signing along as Leela spoke. "Last year, this foundation began as a dream," Leela said. "A dream that silence could become connection, that love could be heard in a different way." She paused, smiling toward Alexander in the front row. "He taught me that listening isn't about ears. It's about heart." Then, she turned toward Eleanor. "And she taught me that even in silence, mothers never stop speaking." The audience applauded warmly. When Leela stepped down, Alexander met her halfway. He didn't say anything, just reached for her hand, looked into her eyes and signed, "Forever." She smiled, tears glistening. "Forever." They kissed as the crowd erupted in applause. And behind them, the Whitmore Foundation banner fluttered softly in the evening breeze, engraved with its motto, "Love needs no voice."